Hello everybody, welcome back to your Essentials group on Samuel. Today we come to one of the most famous and beloved stories in all of the Bible, the story of David and Goliath. Now before we get into the details of the story, it's helpful to talk through quickly what has come before all that we read today. So in the last session we talked about 1 Samuel chapter 10 where Israel begs for a king. And of course soon after their demand is made, God gives them exactly what they want, which is a king.
The king that they get is named Saul, a man who is tall, handsome, and who displays some of the qualities one might look for in a king. However, soon after he is anointed, he disobeys God. And while his disobedience is problematic in and of itself, one of the things that it displays is Saul's deeper character. We see that he is less concerned about God and more concerned about his own position and status. We'll see more of this in the weeks to come.
And so in light of Saul's character, the failure of his heart, God tells Samuel to anoint another king over Israel. However, this time the selected figure is not the kind of person that you'd expect. Rather, it's the youngest son of a shepherd from Bethlehem named David. And of course, David will become one of the greatest figures in all of the Bible, but the thing to note here is that his rise to prominence is not about his impressive lineage or his appearance or even his skill, but it's about his heart for God. And we have this communicated again and again in chapter 13 and 15 and then elsewhere throughout the narratives of David's life. He is simultaneously humble and yet confident in God's faithfulness.
Now, as we come into chapter 17, it's interesting to compare David with Saul. Back when Saul was anointed in chapter 10, his character was revealed soon after in his disobedience. But here, David is anointed, and in chapter 17, we get to see his character emerge in his great faithfulness. David enters into battle against Goliath and not only believes that God will defend his people, but he enters into that battle precisely because the Philistines have mocked the God of Israel. And so, this battle isn't just about two competing tribes. Rather, it's about whose God is actually trustworthy.
That's right. And I think this is why, if you look at today's reading closely, you'll notice David's words to Goliath take up so much more space than any other aspect of the story. And so that tells us that this story is about much more than simply David's faith and his obedience. It's also about God, how he's living and faithful and not dependent on the outwardly visible circumstances of their situation. That's why David says, "The Lord does not save with the sword and the spear, but by his very presence." That is, the story validates David's character and faith, his suitability for the office of king, but even more, it validates God's faithfulness, how he's trustworthy and he holds true to his promises.
Now, this story is so well known that I think there are details one might easily miss. So here are a few things that you might want to keep in mind as you engage more deeply in this narrative. First, note the way Saul actually lets David fight the battle. Even while David makes a case for fighting against Goliath, the chances of him winning are absurd. And the story is clear on that. Look at all the descriptions that we have about Goliath's size, his armor, his weapons. David is not only little more than a child, but is completely under-equipped for the battle. And so even when Saul puts his own armor on the young David, it's ridiculous. Perhaps the image of this young boy wearing a king's armor is actually an ironic display of Saul's own foolishness. Saul won't even fight his own battles.
And the second thing to note is David's obscurity. Again, this is meant to accentuate the way God accomplishes his purposes in surprising ways. At the end of the battle, notice Saul asks Abner, who's the commander of his army, he says, "Whose son is this?" And neither of them know. David is not from some famous family or from some special lineage. He's chosen because of his heart. And this way, David is almost like another Abraham. He builds God's people even while being a nobody at the very beginning.
Finally, we do hope that you begin to explore some of the ways in which David foreshadows Jesus. Again, think about it. Jesus is from Nazareth, a nowhere town. He was also, like David, an unlikely king. He was trained as a carpenter and emerged from relative obscurity. And then, even at the end, Jesus goes up against the powers of sin and death, not with a sword and spear, but trusting in God. There are all sorts of ways that you can begin to see David reflect the one who is to come, and we hope you discover more as you go along.
You see, David shows us the very beginning of what it looks like to pursue God's kingdom. As we'll see, God will do incredible things through David. And while David is deeply flawed, he's not perfect, he's flawed. What we see is that God remained true to his promise that he would build a people who might reflect his character to the world. And even when they fail, he delights in using those who display a heart for him. We hope you enjoy your discussion, and we look forward to seeing you again next time.